I was 9 years old when I discovered the Street of Monsters. I was walking home from school when it happened, daydreaming away. I must have taken a wrong turn. It was late February, at the dead of winter. The menacing wind was blowing me backwards as I trudged through the cold sleet and snow. I turned onto what should have been my street. Right away, I sensed something was wrong, but I was too cold to even care. And besides, I was just a kid. My only concern was to wrap my hands around my Nintendo controller, cozy up on the couch, and get lost in the wonderful world of Zelda. The wind stopped abruptly. This was a nice change. Without the insistent chatter of wind fighting my frostbitten face, I was able to see further on ahead. What first caught my attention, more like raised the tiny hairs on my prepubescent arms, were the houses. They were watching me, their callous whispers mocking me as I tramped across the icy sidewalk. A car pulled up, a classic roadster from the 1930s. It reminded me of my sister's ZZ Top record, Eliminator. The driver got out and he waved, and that's when I knew I was in trouble. The man, and I use this term very loosely, was easily 7 feet tall and as slim as a pole. He wore a pinstripe, double-breasted suit and a matching fedora, and enough jewelry to satisfy a hip-hop artist. His muscular face was finely chiseled, his smile deeply disturbing. My stomach tightened at the very sight of him. This was a bad man. I returned the wave and I kept walking. I stole a sideways glance just to make sure that he wasn't sneaking up on me. He wasn't. Instead, he moved effortlessly toward his picturesque suburban home, and he had morphed into it. His feet never touched the ground. I picked up the pace. It still hadn't dawned on me yet that this wasn't my street. Another car pulled up. It looked like the car from Scarface, which my sister made me watch against my will. I put my head down and I kept walking, shaking in my winter boots. The car haunted me, Aruga, but it didn't look back. The driver shouted, "Hey kid," in a voice so gruff that it would make the Marlboro Man blush. I bolted. I ran flat out until I reached the end of what should have been Sanderson Drive, my street, and I was greeted by the bone-chilling wind and the sudden onslaught of darkness. My heart was a jack-in-the-box, ready to evacuate. My mother's car arrived to save me, though, and I jumped inside, bringing with me a bucket of tears and no clear answer to her plethora of questions. Apparently, I had been gone for hours. I tried telling her about the bad man, but it all just came out as gibberish. Days went by and life moved on. The memories of that bad man and his mobstermobile faded into oblivion. That is until 4 years later. By now, I'm 13 and chock full of teenage insolence. It's February 29th, 1992. The day is drab and dreary. Smells like Teen Spirit is blasting on my Walkman and I'm walking home. Unbeknownst to me, the Street of Monsters had returned. The roadster pulled up next to me, letting the car idle its ugly roar. The driver waved me over. Memories of my scared 9-year-old self returned like an unwanted guest. This was the same man as before. The bad man. I tried walking and failed. My skinny legs remained frozen in their tracks. "Aren't you gonna wave back?" the monster man asked, as he had exited the vehicle. His voice sounded like machine gun fire. I shook my head, avoiding his terrible gaze. The thing's face twisted into a scowl, and before I knew it, he was towering over me, seething. By 13, I was quite tall for my age, but nowhere near as tall as this well-tailored creep. When he touched my shoulder, a million screams of terror trampled across my soul. My legs buckled. I collapsed. Another roadster pulled up. 4 men wearing matching garments spilled out, standing tall as mountains. Their faces were ugly. These were bad men, and they meant harm. They moved effortlessly my way, grinning like gamblers. Meanwhile, the bad man dragged me to my feet. The thing nestled its bony fingers into my shoulder blade, and it pressed down hard. The pain was egregious. Without a second thought, I kicked my boot down on its foot with the full force of fear, and then I booked it. As I ran, I noticed the peculiarity of the houses. They were alive and regarding me as one might watch a sporting event, betting on whether or not I would come out alive. "You'll never make it, you nincompoop," a beige bungalow said in a smoky voice. A chorus of agreement followed. Fortunately, I did make it off the street, right back to where I started. Up ahead, my proper street appeared out of nowhere, so I hightailed it home, crawling into bed, and I wept like a baby. The next morning, I noticed the claw marks covering my badly bruised shoulder. Soon enough, those marks were discovered by my parents, who rushed me to the hospital. Nothing came of it though. Those marks lasted all summer. I thought they would never go away. Sometime later, I told my best friend Michael about the Street of Monsters. Naturally, Michael thought that I was crazy, and ended up spreading rumors about me, which spread like wildfire throughout the halls and cafeteria. Needless to say, I never told another soul about that nefarious street of mobster-clad ghouls. I kept the Street of Monsters a secret. I was with my high school sweetheart the next time that this street appeared, 4 years later to the day. We had just gotten off of the bus and turned onto my street, eager for some alone time before my parents got home. By now, I had forgotten about the Street of Monsters. Likewise, I had forgotten that it was a leap year, although I hadn't made that connection yet. These things didn't mean much to my 17-year-old self at the time. We had had a record-setting snowfall that week. My town was buried under a mountain of snow. It was difficult to see your hand in front of your face, let alone some strange street with talking houses, and bad guys who drove cool cars and floated across the snow as they walked. As soon as the car pulled up, everything came flooding back, and that's when I made the connection. Leap year. How could I be so stupid? And then I freaked out. "Run," I said, grabbing Trisha's tiny hands under her brightly colored mittens. Trisha thought that I was being cute. I wasn't. "Hey," the monster shouted in a bullet-ridden voice. He stepped out of the vehicle and hovered towards us, dressed to the nines. My girlfriend fainted. "Trish," I shouted, desperately trying to lift her. But instead, I slipped and fell flat on my face. "Gotcha!" We were yanked to our feet. I didn't trust the way the bad man was looking at my girlfriend. 2 more roadsters pulled up and a team of tall men surrounded us. They were all impeccably dressed, their faces smeared with scorn. The amazing part was how the snow seemed to pass through them, like holograms. And despite my futile attempts at stopping them, the bad men took my girlfriend. I watched in horror as they stuffed her into the back of the old Ford. The trunk slammed shut like a chrome casket, and the monsters sped away, vanishing under furious fumes of carbonated clouds. Suddenly, I was all alone. The street was a morgue. I tried turning around, but in doing so, the street spun with me, making me nauseous. Apparently, there was only one way to go, Straight. This can't be real. Everything about this street felt wrong. If only I had fought back, I could have prevented those tough guys from taking my girlfriend. Tears froze to my pale and pimpled face like ice on a ring. A low murmur was coming from the houses. They were mocking me. The garage doors moving up and down, laughing and chuckling away. Mailboxes flapping their lids, heckling me, while I slump-shouldered my way off this nefarious street. I fully expected my girlfriend to be waiting for me. She wasn't. I sulked home solemnly, wondering what my next move should be. Trish's parents hated me as it was. They thought that I was a bad influence on her. It's not surprising. Her father swore up and down that he would have me killed, but not before making me really pay for it. I spent the following year under constant police surveillance. I won't go into details because, even to this day, it's too traumatizing for me. Everybody in town believed that I had killed my girlfriend and hid her body. And why not? I was the last person known to be with her. I tried explaining these street of monsters, but of course, no one believed a word that I said. Whenever somebody searched for it, the street wasn't there. Apparently, the Street of Monsters only appears on February 29th, and only to those unfortunate enough to wander through it. It makes me wonder how many other kids have gone missing on this day. I don't remember much of what came next, as my mind melted into a cocktail of antipsychotic drugs. My parents never looked at me the same since. Heck, they still don't. My life was ruined in every way. I kept thinking that Trisha would return, but she never did. After high school, I left that scandalous town and never looked back. Trisha's body was never found. I've recently moved back to that innocuous town, and as luck would have it, I bought a house in my old neighborhood. My job offered me a sweet deal in the place, so I really couldn't pass it up. Deep down, I knew that this was a bad idea, like the past was trying to catch up with me. But my rational mind convinced me otherwise. And there must be a reasonable explanation for what had happened so long ago, whatever it may be. Which leads me to February 29th, 2020. On the cusp of a major pandemic, no less. The morning was cold and stark. I was out walking my dog. After my bull mastiff did his business, we passed by my old street. And that's when Capone started growling. Those terrifying childhood memories started nagging the outer limits of my mind, ready to escape if I let them. Stupidly, I rejected those warnings, and we turned down Sanderson Drive. I even checked the street sign just to be sure. I sighed. Everything was okay, obviously. Monster streets don't exist, not when you're an adult. Capone led the way. As I was studying the houses, checking their authenticity, a car pulled up beside us. I recognized it straight away. It was that old Ford Model A, and it still looked shiny and new. When the driver's window rolled down, the bad man leaned down and waved. His stone black eyes filled me with knives. Capone was cautious, his tail glued between his stubby legs. The bad man got out of the car and glided effortlessly toward me, his feet only inches above the snow-covered ground. This can't be real, I told myself. No way, but it felt real. Real as the grotesque grin stamped across that monster's face. By now, Capone was going ballistic. I let go of his leash and he charged. To my surprise, the monster's face recoiled. The thing flew towards his house like a bat out of heck and morphed into it. The house belched, and then told us to screw off and go away. You had to see it to believe it. Let's get out of here, old buddy, I said after giving him a good pat. Capone pulled me with the sheer force of a strong dog. My jelly-filled legs did their best to keep up. Meanwhile, the monster's house was screaming bloody murder, puffing smoke from its cigar-like chimney as we made our escape. As we approached the end of Monster Street, the creatures who had been watching us from a distance all disappeared into their houses. The wind began to howl and the normal world returned. The glow of the fingernail moon hung like an ugly painting. Many hours had passed by. I shrugged. And then I heard a noise. It was coming from the roadster parked at the edge of that disreputable street. Someone was inside and trying to get out. My heart sank. Should we go back? I asked my dog. Capone barked and wiggled his tail, looking up with eager eyes. I had never entered the street from this end before, so I feared the worst. Capone shot out of my hands like a flash of white lightning. When I caught up to him, I juddered. Someone was locked in the trunk of the car. A girl. "Tommy," she shouted. The sheer terror in her voice was enough to induce a lifetime of panic attacks. "Tommy, is that you?" "Trish?" I stuttered, through chattering teeth. "Help me, Tommy," the voice pleaded. "Please." Part of me died right there. I simply couldn't believe it. 20 years of guilt lifted from my shoulders and landed on the snow with a thud. "Trish," I said, "is it really you? Help me, Tommy, before the bad men come back." My mind split into a million pieces. I didn't know what to do next. A shiny set of keys was dangling from the ignition. Nervously, I reached for the door handle. It opened. I leaned in and swiped the keys, careful not to touch the blameless leather seat, which reeked of formaldehyde. Keys in hand, I scurried back to the trunk. "Tommy, is that you?" The voice inside the trunk had asked. Something in her voice seemed off. I turned the key. A plume of steam wafted as the apartment-sized trunk swung open like a chrome casket. Inside was a fresh-looking teenage girl with strawberry blonde hair, with smooth curls folded over her finely freckled face. Her clothes were in disarray. "Trish, help me, Tommy, please." Her hands and feet were shackled. "Hold on," I said, needing time to think. The houses trembled as their doors flew open. The monsters got out simultaneously, and then they attacked. I looked down at Trish, whose eyes were as big as an ocean. Without a second thought, I reached in and I pulled her out. Her skin was a block of ice. She weighed a ton, and by the time I placed her shackled body onto the sidewalk, I was surrounded by monsters. "We've been waiting for you, Tommy," the bad man said. The thing soared toward me. In its hand was a straight razor, which glistened under the pale light of the cold street lamp. I looked down at Trish, whose eyes had turned into X's, and realized that my worst nightmare had come true. She was one of them. She broke apart the chains as if they were straw. "Come stay with us," the monster who was once my girlfriend said. "You're not her," I managed to say, trying to avoid her deadpan eyes. "Oh, but I am," the thing proclaimed, licking its lizardly lips. "And I'm so happy here. You'll be too. You've been chosen." Her eyes locked into mine and I shuddered. I would be happy here as long as I was with her. Our hands met and she pulled me close and kissed me sweetly. Her lips were like linoleum. Her body as cold as a corpse, but I was home. The monsters applauded and the houses opened and shut their doors in celebration. The car pulled up and the door swung open. "Get in," the driver said. His long-brimmed fedora shielded his face. "Okay," I said in a daze. "Oh, Tommy," Trish said, squeezing my hands. "I just knew that you would come back." She got in first and then tapped the spot next to her. I went in. As I was entering the vehicle, something grabbed me from behind. Capone. The bull mastiff's jaws found the seat of my pants and forced me out of the vehicle. "Let's go, boy," I said, gripping his leash with both hands. Capone led us to safety. The monsters protested, and then retreated back inside their haunted homes. When I turned around, the street was gone. No trace of it anywhere. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and gasped. What the? It was 9 o'clock, which was weird. What disturbed me the most was the date. March 29th, 2022. Apparently, I had been missing for 2 years. My house had been sold and my position at the firm had been replaced. I have nothing, well, that's not true. I still love Capone, aka the best dog ever. After much negotiating, I've reacquired some of my assets. Consequently, I'm residing at a cheap motel, contemplating the mess that has become my life. May this be a lesson to you. Beware the street of monsters. If by chance you've been chosen, and you've happened to pass through it, turn back. Otherwise, the bad men will take you. You'll become one of them. Because every 4 years, on February 29th, the Street of Monsters will return.